In 2012, we back a coup in Ukraine that overthrows a Russian-backed government. That's what
that didn't. Okay, there it is. There it is, boys. There it is. Dinner time. Dinner time. Hit the dinner time bell. Ding, 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 ding. Hit it. Hit it. Hit it. There's the nonsense. Here we go. Okay, first off, it wasn't 2012. It was 2014. I think he's referring to when he says coup is the Euromaidan. We did not organize a coup. The CIA didn't do anything like that. Protesters protested against the government because Yanukovych pulled out of the association agreement after caving to Russian economic coercion when they tried to stop Ukrainian trucks from leaving Ukraine to engage in trade with Russia, even though Russia was a massive trade partner for Ukraine. After he caves and pulls out of the association agreement, which would have allowed Ukrainians visa-free travel to Europe, would have allowed Ukrainians to move throughout Europe, and they would have agreed to certain labor regulations. It would have been a huge economic boom for Ukrainians. That happens, so the government, the people, respond to the government by protesting. They go out in Euromaidan Square, they go out on Maidan Square, and they protest against him pulling out of the association agreement, which he had promised that he was going to stay in. It was actually a campaign promise he made during the 2012 election that he would support the association agreement. That was a lie. He did it, so people are protesting against him. Then the government responds to that, Yanukovych responds to that by beating the protesters very brutally. People then get angry at the protesters getting beaten brutally, and more people get out there with cars and in mass movements with signs and helmets, and they get ready to protest against the government. And they're protesting against the government. Government responds by sending Tutushki-hired thugs after them to stab them, by sending the Berkut special police, which have been accused of things like racketeering, torture, horrific police abuses. They send them in. The Berkut then murders protesters. The Tutushki murders protesters. Over 100 people die in the protest, the heavenly 100. And then Yanukovych is trying to outlaw protesting. Outlaw it. That is when Yanukovych was negotiating with the protesters. Negotiations fail, and he flees the country. That was done by the people of Ukraine, not the CIA. How did the CIA back it? How did we do it? Is it just because we said, oh yeah, it's good that you're protesting against police violence? If that is it, if that's the evil thing that we backed, that's a good thing to do. It's good to call out police violence. It's good to call out the country trying to government trying to make protesting illegal. It's good to call out these things. We didn't back it in any sustainable way. You make it sound like we organized a coup. We didn't. We supported protesters verbally. That's basically it.
Wait, that's not what happened.
That's how Zelensky came to power.
God, he's so clueless. Not only is that not how Zelensky came to power, but after Yanukovych ran away, it wasn't Zelensky that ended up getting power. After an election, Petro Poroshenko came to power. Petro Poroshenko, who at one point was part of Yanukovych's party. Then, after another election in 2019, Petro Poroshenko lost to Zelensky, and then Zelensky took power on a pro-peace platform. So, I mean, look, this guy has no clue what he's talking about. He's gotten every fact wrong. It wasn't in 2012, it was in 2014. It wasn't a coup, and that's not how Zelensky came to power.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Why is he so adamant? How can he be so confident when he knows so little?
First of all, it's 2014, not 2012, but no.
No, because Crimea fell in 2014, which was a response to the 2012 Zelensky coming to power.
No.
What is he saying? What is he saying? He's completely clueless. What does that even mean? Zelensky came to power in 2019. What is he saying? He came to power way later. In 2012, Yanukovych, the person who fled the country after the protests in 2014, he was reelected in 2012. In 2014, in a response to the protest that happened in 2014 after Yanukovych fled the country, once the Russians realized that their boy had been kicked out and had ran away, that's when they invaded Crimea, so they could have dominion over it for both Russian nationalist reasons and strategic reasons, because they wanted access to the port. But that was all in 2014. He lacks any knowledge about this conflict.
Oh, in 2014, Crimea happened in response to oh my God, Yanukovych being ousted from the country in 2014.
Oh, I thought that happened in 2012.
No, it was 2014. Okay. But the Euromaidan protests, and then eventually the revolution that happened, firstly, people always point to this idea that there was a U.S. coup in Ukraine.
No, backed coup. There's a difference.
What's the difference? What's the difference? Distinct the difference. How did we do it?
Ukrainians were protesting for a long time for a lot of reasons. Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in the world prior to 2014.
It's still one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
I don't know if I'd say as much as it was prior to 2014.
Not as much, but it's still one of the most corrupt.
Listen, they're in a war.
You could make China 100% better country, and it's still one of the worst countries in the world.
I don't know if I would say that. I'm just saying that
the Ukraine is not comparable to China. Where is these comparisons coming from?
The evidence that there was a U.S.-backed coup in Ukraine is not existent. I don't think there's any evidence to point to the fact that the U.S. backed the coup.
The U.S. gave the rebels resources. That's the U.S. backing the rebels.
What is he talking about? What resources? What resources? There were no rebels. What the fuck is he talking about? What rebels? It was a protest movement. It was a protest movement. That would be like calling a BLM protester a rebel. Like, okay, what we really gotta say? We didn't. Number one, there were no rebels. There was no armed rebellion. Okay, there was protests. Eventually, it got too heated for Yanukovych. Failed in negotiations. Fled the country. Two, we didn't give them any resources. What resources did we give them? Like, you could say that NGOs might have provided like medical gauze, maybe. Like there were some doctors on the street that was like bandaging up people. You could maybe there was NGOs that were funded that were anti-corruption stuff, but that wasn't even tied directly to the what does he mean? What resources did we give? What resources that you think justifies us saying it was a US backed coup, as if we basically gave them all the guns and money to overthrow the government?
No.
Yes.
No. There were no rebels in 2014. They were just protesters. They were the Euromaidan protesters. There weren't like official rebel groups to like give arms or weapons to.
This is not how historians usually view revolutions. I mean, at some
What is he talking about? You can't cite historians and be wrong about everything.
point, we don't. When we talk about the Boston Massacre, we usually refer to them as the American revolutionaries, not the American protesters. But at the time, they were just protesters.
Sure.
They were just protesters. If you're going to talk about this, actually, yes, we're not going to call them American. Whatever. Okay, whatever. Let's let this respond. I'm already yelling too much.
I'm just saying that like the reason why Yanukovych was ousted happened after I always fuck the name of it. So the Yellow Jacket police started like shooting at protesters. And people started to get obviously really mad because that was like the culmination of all the protests. Once police were firing on protesters and people started to get really mad, Yanukovych fled the country, and that like none of that needed U.S. support. There were no like U.S. arms flowing into the country with like tons of fighting with the government. None of that was happening. I've never seen any evidence presented that like it's a U.S. backed coup. There's not like a ton of like freedom fighters on the ground. It's not like Syria or something.
No,
some people shooting and killing each other. Like it was 1 or 2 relatively violent days that ended up with Yanukovych fleeing the country.
And yes, when your active government flees the country and a new regime comes to power, that is a coup.
Well, they call it a revolution, but
it just depends on which side you support. That's the only difference on what those words are.
Sure, it might be, but
Okay, but the Ukrainian side was correct. Don't murder protesters and don't outlaw protesting. Like, I think as a libertarian, he would agree with that. Come on.
I mean, I'm going to probably support the side of the people that are trying to get representation of the government and not the guy that's trying to enact laws to violently oppress freedom of speech, not having his police officers shooting on protesters, and not ignoring the will of their parliament.
And I agree with you that those protesters would be in the right. But what happens is because the U.S. Supports them, and we now end up with a large amount of influence and ties to this country with Joe Biden and his son on the board of Burisma, which
What is he he doesn't know anything. He is so confident, but he doesn't know shit. How is he actually? Why is he even talking about it? Why did he bring it up? He brought up the topic. What is he talking about? Dude, the reason we have influence, we've been giving billions of dollars to aid to Ukraine way before Biden was in office and way before Biden was even vice president or before Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. We had given billions of dollars to aid that had to deal with like drug trafficking and border patrol and to try to stop human trafficking and deal with corruption. Like there was a million different, we had ties to Ukraine ever since the end of the Cold War. It's just Russia also had ties to Ukraine, and then Russia burnt their ties through their behavior towards the state of Ukraine. Ukraine then shifts towards the West. The protesters viewed liberal democracy and the path forward with Europe as more beneficial than a path forward with Russia, and that's why they made a Western turn. And but then we had more and more influence. But this wasn't due to Burisma. There is no evidence that anything that occurred on Burisma influenced American foreign policy towards Ukraine whatsoever. There's no evidence.
Border Burisma has nothing to do with how Ukraine runs its policies. And also,
no, the country is incredibly corrupt, and Burisma is a major country that has ties in huge parts of their.
What? It's not a country. It was a company that no longer even exists. I don't. It doesn't even exist anymore, and it's not a country.
The United States did not back any part of the revolution. There was no financial money flowing into like rebel